There might be some players just sitting on your bench or maybe even your waiver wire that have secret upside in week 12. But before I get to those players, let me remind you, if you haven't joined Underdog Fantasy, now is the time, because not only are they going to give all new customers this Lamar Jackson special on Sunday, he just needs to go higher than half a yard. You can pair this pick with any other pick or picks you like and potentially 20x your entry. But also, if you sign up now using promo code ENDGAME at Underdog Fantasy, not only are you going to get this new customer special, they're also going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Double your money instantly. Take it, put it on the Lamar Jackson free square, and potentially 20x it. Now, I know there's some big news out of Pittsburgh. Not only did OC Matt Canada get fired, but Jaylen Warren has been pretty much on fire in fantasy. But don't overlook Najee Harris this week. Prior to that tough matchup last week against Cleveland, Najee Harris had seen 16 carries in each of the last two games, 4 targets in those games, and had scored at least 15 PPR points. Now the Steelers' run game draws a fantastic matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals team that's allowing the 5th most points to running backs and the 2nd most yards per carry. Not to mention, this Bengals offense isn't going to be the high-powered offense we're used to, probably, with Jake Browning under center instead of Joe Burrow. So this should be another game where the Steelers have no problem running the ball and just committing to the run. Now, I do like Jaylen Warren more than Najee Harris this week. I think it's a great spot for Jaylen Warren. But I think that Jaylen Warren, most people are pretty much starting him this week. If you want to go a little deeper, if you've got Najee Harris, I think he's also a very good start this week. He's got a really high floor in this matchup. He's got touchdown potential. I think both Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren come through. But if you're going a little deeper, I think Najee's the guy you can look at. Look, maybe just sitting on your bench. Maybe in shallower leagues, he's still sitting on waiver wires. But Najee Harris should have a nice game this week in a plus matchup. Now, I talked about Jerome Ford on last week's Secret Upside video, but I like him again this week. Sure, he didn't smash last week, but he came through with a decent game. But he had some very strange usage in that game. Got 8 carries and a touchdown on the first quarter, and then kind of wasn't used much the rest of the game, which was really weird. But I think what was kind of lost in it was he still had 5 targets last week. Granted, he only caught 1 of them, but that's elite usage. I think last week was just one of those weird weeks, because you looked at 2 weeks prior, he'd had 20 carries and 5 targets, and then he had 17 carries and 2 targets. So he was technically the workhorse, playing over 60% of the snaps prior to last week. I think we see the Browns go back to that or back something closer than that, and he gets a fantastic matchup this week. The best matchup, honestly, for running backs against this Broncos defense. Sure, they've been better, but they're still horrible against the run. They've gotten better against the pass, but they're awful against the run. We saw what Alexander Mattison and Ty Chandler did to this defense last week. Both guys almost got 80 yards, had nice games against this defense. If Jerome Ford goes back to getting 60% of the snaps, 15 or more carries in this game with his targets, he should absolutely have a great game in week 12. Another guy in a fantastic spot that people are pretty low on now because of what happened last week. But I'm going to say I think that was just an anomaly. I think he'll get back to getting more usage this week. I don't think they're going to ask Dorian Thompson-Robinson to throw the ball 40 times again, which was crazy because that game wasn't even a blowout. This should be another game, a very low-scoring game, a game where they should be able to run the ball if they want to. I think Jerome Ford bounces back in a big way this week. I like Jerome Ford a lot in this matchup. Now, wide receiver, I really like rookie Josh Downs this week. He's kind of been forgotten. Remember, he had that stretch there, a few games where he got hot and people were really all about him. Then he had that knee injury in week 9, somehow gutted it out and played in week 10, but he only played 25% of the snaps in that game. Then the team had their bye week, so now people have kind of forgotten about this guy. He draws a fantastic matchup this week against the Tampa Bay Bucs secondary that not only is banged up with injuries, but is allowing the 5th most points to wide receivers. Not to mention they're coming out of the bye week and they get to play at home. That is a plus here. And prior to that knee injury in week 9, he had seen 6 or more targets in 4 straight games. It's now been 3 weeks since the knee injury. He's had time to heal. You got to think he's closer to 100%. I think he sees 6+ targets again in this game. This is a great matchup for him this week, like I said, at home. And one thing about the Buccaneers, this game, sometimes these games turn into higher scoring games. The Colts play really fast. The Bucs play really fast. I think this is a sneaky, high scoring potential type of game. So if you had Josh Downs and now he's just sitting on your bench and you're not sure about him, I think you could feel great about Josh Downs this week. I think you can also feel great about Pop Douglas, Demario Douglas out there in New England. Now, it's hard to ever get excited about him because, well, Patriots, right? But this is a guy who's had 6 or more targets in 4 straight games. And when you look at the last 2 games that they've played without Kendrick Bourne since he tore his ACL, he's had 16 targets and 11 catches. He's basically the only guy they really have to throw to. Sure, they sometimes throw to Juju, sometimes Hunter Henry near the red zone, but Pop Douglas is truly the number 1 receiver here. Now, on the downside, he's not a guy that's going to rack up a lot of yardage. He's had 11 catches over the last 2 games, but not a whole lot of yardage here. So he doesn't have the highest ceiling, but maybe this is the week he finally finds pay dirt because he's facing a Giants defense that's allowing the 3rd most points to wide receivers on the season. And while there are certainly riskier options with plenty of more upside, like a guy like, say, Rashid Shaheed, I think Demario Pop Douglas is a safer option with a very high floor in your PPR leagues. And I think this week he also has decent upside. So rather than risk it with a guy like Shaheed who could, sure, he could hit a long touchdown or he could do absolutely nothing, go with a guy like Pop. He'll give you a high floor, relatively safe floor. Plus in this matchup, like I said, maybe he finds the end zone finally and gives you a decent ceiling as well. So if you're in a PPR leagues, I really like Pop Douglas. Now, if you're looking for a streaming option, I like Matthew Stafford. After a nice start to the season, he's had a rough stretch here, but he's had a brutal stretch of defenses, not to mention he had that wrist injury that he had to deal with for a little bit. But coming out of the bye last week, he looked healthy. He was throwing the ball well. He should have really had 2 touchdowns in that game, but the second touchdown got called back on a holding penalty. And now he gets a fantastic matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, who are giving up the 9th most points to quarterbacks. I know Cooper Kupp is still kind of questionable whether he'll play or not, but I don't think it matters in this matchup. He's got Puka Nacua. Tutu Atwell can hit big plays. He's got Kyren Williams back out of the backfield now. I think Matthew Stafford can put up a nice game here. No, I don't think he's going to put up a top 5, top 10 type of QB week, but I think he can give you a top 15 QB week in this matchup. Looks healthy, looks good, has enough weapons here, and the matchup begs you to start Matthew Stafford. So if you're looking for a streaming option this week, and I'll be honest, there's not a lot of guys I really like, I think Matthew Stafford is one of the best. But my favorite streaming option this week is Baker Mayfield. He's available in almost 50% of fantasy leagues still, and yes, he bombed last week, kind of predictably, on the road against the 49ers, but when you look at him before that, he had 3 straight games with over 20 fantasy points. He's had 6 games this year with over 20 fantasy points and 7 with over 17 fantasy points. And you can't be scared of this matchup. I mean, I'd like it better if they're at home, but they're on the road in Indy, in the Dome. You don't have to worry about any weather. And like I said, the Colts play fast, the Bucs play fast. This game should feature a lot of snaps, a lot of opportunities. I think it's going to be higher scoring than people think. Both tend to struggle against the pass a bit, so I think we could see a kind of a mini shootout type of game here. And Baker Mayfield has been mostly good this year. And because the Bucs aren't super effective running the ball, he's being asked to throw the ball a lot. He has many games with over 40 attempts this year. I think he could do it again this week. In a good matchup, he's been mostly good for fantasy this year. I think it continues here in week 12 in a good matchup. Now, if you lost Mark Andrews or you just need help at the tight end position, I got a couple of guys I'm going to recommend. And obviously the obvious choice here is Isaiah Likely. He's the kind of the Mark Andrews replacement. He does have a very good matchup this week against the Chargers. While they're not necessarily terrible against tight ends, they're just not a good defense, right? They give up a lot through the air, a lot in the passing game, and they just lost their star defensive player, Joey Bosa, to injured reserve. So their defense just took a big hit and got even worse. Now, my worry with Isaiah Likely is in week 1, when Mark Andrews missed, and they played Houston, who we now know is not very good against tight ends. He only had 1 catch for 4 yards. I'm not sure he just slots in as the clear Andrews replacement like we saw a couple years ago. Because remember, a couple things have changed here. Number 1, they actually have other weapons. They have Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham. They have other guys they can actually throw the ball to, like actual wide receivers in the NFL. But also, this is a new offensive coordinator, a different system. Yes, Mark Andrews has still been good in this system, but that's just because Mark Andrews is so good. Like when you have a talented player, you're going to get him the ball. I'm not sure they feel that way about Isaiah Likely. But look, there's not a lot out there on the waiver wire right now. He's got a good matchup. They should be able to move the ball, put up points, and throw the ball. So I think Isaiah Likely is okay this week. He could at least maybe score a touchdown. Then I also really like Tanner Hudson. We saw last week with Joe Burrow out, Tanner Hudson actually led the Bengals in receiving, 4 catches for 49 yards. Now, it's not a great line, but again, we're talking about streaming tight end here. What are we really looking for? A 25, 30-point game? That's probably not going to happen. We're looking for a guy who's going to get targeted, going to get catches, going to get yards, and has a chance to score a touchdown. And I think Tanner Hudson definitely checks all those boxes. Not to mention he gets this great matchup against the Steelers. You look at it on paper, you think, well, they don't give up a lot to the tight end, and that's true. But that was before Quan Alexander got hurt. Remember Quan Alexander last week went on IR. He was one of the best cover linebackers in the entire NFL. That opened things up for David Njoku last week. Remember, we said, hey, start David Njoku. This is a good spot for him, and he came through. I think Tanner Hudson can also come through. It looks like T. Higgins is going to miss again, so that should open up more opportunities. Jake Browning, probably not going to take a lot of chances down the field. Probably going to take a lot of the easy throws, kind of like what we're seeing with David Njoku and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. A lot of times these rookies will just take those easy over-the-middle throws. I think we see that with Jake Browning. So I think Tanner Hudson, another guy, widely available on most waiver wires. If you lost Mark Andrews or you're just desperate at tight end, go take a look at Tanner Hudson. I think he comes through. And you should also go take a look at all of our Week 12 content to help you dominate and win this week. Check it out on our Week 12 playlist right here.